My grandparents on the McNeilly side were farmers. My great-grandfather came from Ireland, and of course the big thing in the early days was potatoes and beans. There was a market for them, and the price was pretty good, so they milked a few cows for their own use, but the money they received was the sale of potatoes and beans. My grandparents on the other side, the Williams side of the family, he was a lumberjack in the winter, farmer in summertime. And he done that for several years. They came from Virginia originally, and northern Virginia, settled in Sherman City, and they farmed there as well. His father, I think, worked, there was a mill in Sherman City as well as a cheese plant, and I think he worked in one of those as well as farmed some. And my grandfather, he worked in the woods in the winter with a team of horses. He'd take his horses to the woods in the winter. In the spring, when it thawed up a little bit, the snow left, they'd come back and farm. One thing I do remember is no trees. I mean, like, if you look up M66, there'd be no trees. They're all harvested. Whatever was there is gone. Our late 40s, middle 40s, late 40s, made the children made their money by picking up potatoes in the fall of the year. My grandfather, McNeilly, would pay 10 cents a crate if you'd pick up his potatoes. So, and he raised the big Chippewas. They're white potato, and you could fill a crate up pretty fast. So we made some good cash there. Summertime, the kids would pick string beans or pickles for cash. And that was about the only way we made any money, any spending money, other than parents giving it to you. But my dad, my uncle, my grandfather, and a neighbor would sing around the piano. They had a quartet. My grandpa McNeilly and my uncle Ed, my dad, and Red Darnell. They called him Red Darnell. His real name was Cecil Darnell. He sang bass, and they'd get together once or twice a week and sing a lot of hymns normally. And other than that, it was listen to the radio, read a book, or play games. We'd quite often play outside until sometimes after dark. I was 11 years old when we moved here, and back then, of course, at that time we consolidated to Barryton Rural Agricultural School. I started down there in the 6th grade. Bus would pick us up, we'd go to school, come back, and then my job was to go gather up the cows in the pasture field, get them in ready to be milked from my father. My older brother Charles and I helped with the farm work. We usually took 2 weeks off in the summer, Charles and I, and we'd put a tent up on Merrill Lake, and we could spend the whole 2 weeks there, but we did have to come home and do chores once a day, feed the calves and then we'd go back, go fishing or swimming or whatever. We done that every summer. And then my folks would usually take a week or 2 weeks off, and Charles and I would take care of the chores while they were gone. So we kind of traded off on that. We had our own pony, the cow pony that we chased cows with, or gathered them up, cut firewood for the winter, cleared land. My dad wanted the land cleared, so we cut all the trees off and used them for firewood. And then after they were all taken care of, then the land was, stumps were cleared, and that was back to farmland. We'd all go swimming. There was one deep hole where the dam was at, and the water coming over the dam made a hole in the river. It was about 6, 7 feet deep. So we'd dive into that. And we played in the river a lot growing up. Yeah. I was probably 12 and he was probably 14. We were allowed to take a gun, go rabbit hunting, squirrel. Of course, we did quite a bit of fishing. My other brother was 6 years younger, so he kind of got left out. Dad hired a big dozer to come in, and he'd done all the stumping and the grading. The work began after he left, so we had to pick up all the roots and get the ground ready to plant, level, work it out with machinery. My mother would go to buy groceries in town in Barryton, usually Laughlin, Ward and Soper Company. And my dad would take his meat to McCurzy's to get processed. He dealt with the elevator when it was in Barryton, with the old elevator, which was called Barryton Beanery or Barryton Co-op, or anyway. Later years they built a new one, but newer one. They usually milked, back when we bought the farm, the barn would hold 40 cows, and that usually kept it full. My father built a milk house and a milking parlor on the side of the old barn, and the cows would be brought in to milk, and then they were filled cans that went into coolers originally, which were water cooled with electric. And then they picked it up every day, pick up fresh milk. He'd usually fill the cooler. That milk, at that time, it was Detroit Pure Milk, and which the milk went to Kroger Company, and Kroger's also had their inspectors come out, check the farm, and give it the stamp of approval for their milk. Kroger was quite demanding on cleanliness and making sure they had a good product. And then later years they went from cans to bulk. And then the milk, MMPA, Michigan Milk Producers, come in, and they actually paid you for the milk, and they had a dumping station in Ovid. So they'd truck the milk to Ovid, and then it would go from there to the creameries or processing plants. One of the I thought at the time, important thing was we lived, prior to this farm, we lived over in a country road, gravel road. Hardly ever any cars went by. We moved over here, and M66 had a lot of traffic, and we were here when they resurfaced it and put the blacktop in. That was, I think, 1948 or 9, I think. And that made the cars go faster, of course, but cut down on the dust and the noise. My father had a tractor. His first tractor was a 1939 Ford. Bought it in around 41, I think. It was a used tractor. Traded a team of horses for it, because he had had an extra team of horses. Then started out with that tractor, and then moved here on this farm. He bought a second one, so he had 2 Fords, and then it was hard work, long hours. The tractors didn't pull much more than the horses. It was just more convenient. and it'd pull a two-bottom plow, but on a small drag and a small disc. But he had two of them, so that cut the time down. And then he bought in 1953, he bought another Ford, a Jubilee, which was more advanced. It had more features, more power, and so it made it a little easier to work. Things got easier as time progressed because of the bigger equipment, and it was easier to run the equipment. You'd do more work in less time. So, and also in around 1950, my mother had laying chickens that were, the eggs were used for the hatchery, reproduction. So that was kind of her money. She had about 400 of them, and they had a contract with the feed company, and they would furnish the feed, buy the eggs back. So she made a little money, household money. And then back then we also had a good chicken market for meat. It took 12 weeks to bring a baby chick up to around 4 pounds, butcher size. And this area had a lot of chickens. But that, somewhere in the 50s, they moved all that to Georgia, so that left Michigan. Actually, we had 3 automobile dealers, Ford, Chevrolet, and Nash. And the co-ops sold farm machinery, had a repair shop. The stores were quite bustling because people didn't go to Mount Pleasant or Big Rapids or Cadillac. They pretty much stayed because of the transportation. Yeah, Barryton was quite bustling. I don't think there was many more people other than the oil boom when that come in. That brought probably another 100 people into Barryton. They were hard pressed for places to stay because there was not many hotels or rooming houses, but they did find a place, and Smith Petroleum was the first oil field. Then secondly was Coldwater. It brought a lot of people in from other parts of the nation, really. We did baseball. We didn't have football. Back then they had some injuries in high school, so they canceled football. But I liked to play softball. And we had the FFA, which was Future Farmers of America. We had our own softball team. So we would play other teams, as well as I like to play basketball also, but I didn't play past junior high. When we got into high school, I wasn't able to practice like the other players, and so I dropped out. We had a theater in Barryton, and we were allowed to go to the theater. I think it was maybe 25 cents to watch a movie, and my parents quite often would take the whole family, and like on a Friday night, we'd all go to the movie, either Barryton or Everett, sometimes go to Everett. Of course, the big event was the celebration. We were allowed to go to that, and we'd have some money to spend. They would have fireworks, and you'd meet a lot of people on Main Street. We were in speech class, and I decided to take speech because it was hard for me to speak in public. And I was the president of the FFA Association, and so I had to speak at their banquets and the meetings, so I took speech to help me, and for some reason, Kay was assigned a seat beside of me, and that's where it began. And I blame Miss Nelson for putting her there by Kay's request, but I'm not sure that's correct. We dated for a year, I think, or so, and decided to get married. And my older sister was married, and my older brother was married. We were young, but we decided to get married. Well, then we were engaged for about a year before we actually got married. We got married in the Barryton Church of God, 1953. Our honeymoon was to Lansing. We spent some time with my dad's brother and my uncle. He was always he was younger than my dad, and I spent quite a lot of time with him. And we visited him actually on our honeymoon. Then we went from there to Lansing and rented an apartment or something. And I never had a car until I was out of high school. I could buy one, get a job and buy one. And that was I graduated in '52, and I think it was '53 before I was able to get a car. My dad did have a car that he would let me use. Then, at that time, he had a decent car. It was a Rambler, not a Rambler, it was a Nash Ambassador, and I bought it from Reddick's Sales there in Barryton. And so I did get to drive that my senior year in high school. My first car was a Ford convertible, 1941. The first winter I froze in it, so I traded it off for a 1949 Chevrolet two-door, and that's what we had when we were married. My first job before I was married, Dale Toogood and I, which was my best friend in high school, we went to Muskegon to Lakey's Foundry, Lakey's, and they made parts for washing machines. And our job, Dale and I's job, was to drive these little tractors with gondolas, take the hot castings out on the deck and let them cool. And we'd take them out there and park them, go get another load and take out. And they would, as soon as they got cooled, then they'd go back, pick them up, take them back to the machine room, and then they done whatever they had to do to ship them out. And that was a pretty dirty job, and that lasted one winter. And then in the summer, I got a job outside, construction job, building roads with Pearson Company. And we worked, the first job we had was down by Battle Creek. It's on US 12. And we had a small pour there. They done everything from building the grade to pouring the concrete. And my job was in the concrete on the final pour. So that lasted until the job got done. Then they moved to Port Huron, and I decided I didn't want to live in Port Huron or work there, so I was ready to come home. But then I come home, and when winter came, I went to, I worked at Gibson Refrigerator, somewhere in there. I think that might have been before. That was before I went to work on the road, because Gibson Refrigerator Company in Greenville also made ammunitions for the Korean War. And the people there went on strike for more money, and I didn't want to walk the picket line, and I needed a check, so I went to work at the building highways. Then after that winter, that fall, I went to work at Oldsmobile in Lansing at an Olds motor plant. I worked there until spring. I had a problem with working inside in the wintertime, in the summertime. So spring came and I left. Got another job outside.
And what year was that about?
I'm sorry?
What year would have that been that you
That
worked?
would have been in the winter of, let's see, that would have been in 1952 or 53. Must have been in 53. Because we got married in 53. And I was working in Lansing before we got married. Easy job, good money, but I didn't like working inside. Well, after we were married, I worked at Culligan Softwater in Grand Rapids for 8 years. And then we decided we wanted to move back up north, no jobs. So we bought a job, bought a party store, a small store. It was Cole's Market. And it's where Peterson's store used to be years ago. And we run that for about 8 years. Then we bought the farm here in 1971. 1971, I was working in the cow barn, nailing some boards up, and ricocheted out and went in directly in my eye, and pupil of my eye, and they had to do constructive surgery, which actually I was left with 20/20 vision, no side effects. I wore glasses for 6 months, and then I could see without glasses. And Dr. Johnson of Mount Pleasant fixed it for me. He just came back from laser surgery in Ann Arbor, how to do laser. So he was new at fixing eyes. So I was lucky, very lucky to get up. And he come in like 2 o'clock in the morning and fix my eye for me. Well, the way I understand it from the abstract, Charles P. Merrill got all this property and pavement of services in the armed forces. They didn't have any money back then, so they gave him property. Well, then in turn, it's been all been sold off. The first owner that I recall would be Claire Abbey, and his in-laws are the ones that put the money up, and they had something to do with carrying mail in Barryton, because there was some old Model Ts back by the river that were discarded and that he'd used to deliver mail with. I forgot what his name was. But it was Claire Abbey's father-in-law. Well, Claire sold the property to my dad, mother, and my dad and mother bought this farm in 1945. There was originally a 40-acre where the house was at, and 40 acres back in Osceola County where the dam was at in the Chippewa River. Since that time, my dad had purchased another 80 east of this 40 that run north and south to the next road south. And then he bought 40 on the corner of M66 and Evergreen Road. Then when I bought the farm in 1971, we purchased another 40 on the west side of M66 adjoining the property. I forget what year we bought the last 40. I think it was in around 1980. Deborah was born in Lakeview Hospital, and we were actually working on the farm here for my father at that time, living in my grandmother's stone house with them. We shared the bathroom, and we had our own bedroom, and she was born January the 19th, 1955, Lakeview Hospital. Doc Kowaleski was our doctor out of Remus. He was also my uncle. Melody was and Rose, I think they were both born in Lakeview Hospital. When Kevin was born, we lived in Grand Rapids, and Kay wanted to deliver in Lakeview with Doc Kowaleski. Well, we made it to Lakeview, but it was touch and go, and a different doctor, I think, ended up delivering. So then when Jeff come along, we said, we're not trying that again, so he was born in Grand Rapids, and that was a close call. I'd just made it to the hospital, didn't get parked yet when she was going into delivery. And then Laurie come along, and we took off. We lived in Barryton then, and we took off again with Doc Kowaleski being the doctor. He told us to go to the hospital, so my car that I had was overheating. So we got as far as Remus, and I decided we're not going to blow the engine up on the road and have a baby to deliver, so I stopped at the standard station, called the ambulance, and they came. Kay had a fit. She wasn't going to the hospital in ambulance, but we did go, and it was about an hour after we got there, Laurie was born. So normally deliveries were faster than that. But yeah. Trudy come along, the number 7, she had normal delivery. At the Chippewa River on the back part of the farm, there was a dam which they made shingle mills, or shingles for houses and barns. And there was a roadway across the dam where they traveled with horses and buggies. That would have been somewhere in the late 1800s, 1890. The main office was in what they called the Chippewa Station, which was on, I think it's the Ann Arbor Railroad that followed US 10. There was housing, mess hall to feed the workers. From my understanding, from standing at the point of the dam, looking north, it would be all open water country for the next over mile of water. That's what my dad said, because he was back there when he was a youngster, and he was born in 1909, so I think he was around 12, and when he was visited the dam. I know my grandmother would come by rail. She was lived up by Harrison, and she would come down, get the rail car at Clare, I suppose, and bring it over to Chippewa Station. Then my grandfather would pick her up and take her down to where he lived at Sherman City. We did have fear in the war because they would come over the radio and say we were going to have blackouts, and especially when Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, they had usually, back then for them to fly, they went from town to town because they didn't have omni stations or anything. So the towns would paint their name on top of the buildings, and so the aircraft or the pilots would know where they're at, and they would have maps of the area so they would know. They'd have siren raids. Barryton had one on top of the Standard Oil Station. And during that time when people were afraid, somebody would man a watch for any incoming aircraft. Most towns had their own little airports where small planes could land if they had to.
Where was Barryton's airport?
I'm sorry?
Where was the airport for Barryton?
Barryton Airport was on the east side of town. That's the name of that street that goes over the East Bridge. You take that to the T of the road, and on the south side, or the right side, there was 40 acres in there that was designated from the federal government to be an airport. And that was, somebody had kept it trimmed up until the 70s, and then it started growing up to trees, and nobody ever used it.
Did any planes ever land there?
I'm sorry?
Did very many planes ever land there?
No, private planes did. And during the 3rd of August celebration, what they call the 3rd of August, it wasn't always on the 3rd, it was the closest weekend to the 3rd in August. They would sometimes give rides from there, helicopter as well as double wingers, and people would pay to ride.